We begin with case number 10, the tragic end of a young woman on the cusp of her future, and a chilling detail that would haunt the case file for nearly 50 years. Number 10, the unspoken secret of Krizanne Baxter, 1978-2023. The autumn of 1978 was crisp in Spokane, Washington. For 16-year-old Krizanne Baxter, it was a time of teenage freedom and future plans. She was a typical high school sophomore, bright, popular, and looking forward to her driver's license. She loved music, she loved her friends, and she loved the quiet predictability of her suburban life. She had her whole life stretched out ahead of her, a future her killer would brutally extinguish in the dark anonymity of a late October night. The date was October 4th, 1978. Krizanne was last seen leaving a friend's house in the early evening. She was simply walking home, a short journey that should have taken minutes, but one she would never complete. When she didn't arrive, the alarm was raised almost immediately. Her disappearance was sudden, baffling, and instantly felt wrong. Her parents, frantic, called everyone. They called friends, checked bus stops, and drove the route she was supposed to have taken, their flashlights carving desperate beams through the growing darkness. The community mobilized, but the night swallowed Krizanne whole. 2 days later, the fear became a horrific reality. Krizanne's body was discovered hidden near a creek, just a short distance from the route she was supposed to have taken home. The scene was devastating. She had been sexually assaulted and brutally strangled. The immediate investigation was a whirlwind of activity. Every neighbor was questioned, every known local offender was checked, but the case quickly ran into dead ends. There were no witnesses, no clear suspects. And in 1978, the technology needed to truly identify the perpetrator simply didn't exist. The small amount of physical evidence collected was carefully documented, sealed, and placed into storage. A tiny comfort for the detectives, but a hollow one for the family. The detectives knew, even then, that a crucial piece of the puzzle was missing. They just didn't know what it was. The case went cold. The files were sealed, the neighborhood whispers faded, and Krizanne's memory was slowly absorbed into the painful silence of an unsolved crime. 45 years. That's how long her family had to live with the agonizing question, who took our daughter? The silence was a constant companion, a heavy blanket of injustice covering their lives. But that file, the one marked Krizanne Baxter, it never truly left the desk of the Spokane Police Department's cold case unit. They knew the key was the small amount of physical evidence collected back in 1978. Evidence that had been meticulously preserved for 4 decades, like a silent ticking bomb, waiting for its moment to detonate. The true hero of this breakthrough wasn't a detective on the street, but science. Enter the revolution of investigative genetic genealogy. In the early 2020s, a team of dedicated cold case investigators working alongside forensic genealogists re-examined the evidence. This was the Hail Mary pass. They took the DNA profile that had been sitting in the national database, unidentified for decades, and submitted it to public genealogy databases. This technique doesn't give a name directly. It gives a family tree. It points to distant relatives of the killer, a cousin, a second uncle, a great aunt, and then the tedious, heartbreaking work of mapping out that family tree begins. It is an act of forensic archaeology, digging through decades of birth certificates, marriage licenses, and obituaries. The trail was long and complex, but the genealogical detective work was relentless. The web of connections grew tighter, closer and closer to one individual. The man's name was Keith D. Lindblom. Lindblom was not an obvious suspect from 1978. He was a face in the crowd, a shadow in the night. The investigation revealed he had been living in the Spokane area at the time of the murder. The team developed enough circumstantial evidence based on the family tree link to request a direct, surreptitious sample of Lindblom's DNA. The match was undeniable. It was the genetic signature of the killer who had taken Krizan's life 45 years earlier. In September 2023, the announcement was made. The case was closed. The relief for Krizan's family was immense, a wave of long-awaited truth washing over 5 decades of grief. But Lindblom, however, would never face a courtroom. He had died in 2017, taking his secret with him to the grave, perhaps believing until his final breath that he had escaped justice. For Krizan's family, the closure was bittersweet. The pain was still raw, but the question was finally answered. The lead detective on the case noted that the only reason they knew who did it was because of the perfect preservation of the evidence from 1978, a testament to the foresight of the original investigators. The truth had emerged from the silence. A ghost from 1978 was given a name in 2023. But this breakthrough technique, this relentless pursuit using DNA, was just getting started. It was about to unlock far older, far more entrenched secrets. We move now to case number 9, a crime committed in the very place children are supposed to be safe. A vibrant San Jose teacher stalked and attacked right outside her classroom. If the story of perseverance against the odds has captivated you, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue to bring these long-forgotten stories of justice to light. And let me know in the comments, what cold case in your home state do you think needs this kind of breakthrough? We'll be closing another agonizing loop shortly. Number 9. The teacher lost in the hallway. Diane Peterson, 1978-2025. San Jose, California in 1978. The year was marked by the gentle rhythm of school bells and the promise of summer break. Diane Peterson, a dedicated and beloved elementary school teacher, was preparing for the end of the term. She was the kind of person that defined the word nurturing, firm but fair, and entirely committed to the small lives under her care. She was a pillar of the community, known for her bright, infectious smile and her dedication to education. But on a quiet afternoon in 1978, the safety of the school grounds was violently shattered. Diane was found stabbed outside her classroom. The details were shocking, a brutal, targeted assault in a place meant to be secure, where children's drawings lined the hallways and the smell of chalk and floor wax was the norm. The community was instantly gripped by fear. Was it a troubled parent, a stranger, a former student? The sheer audacity of the crime, committed on school property, sent shockwaves through San Jose. Investigators swarmed the scene. The school was locked down. Every staff member, every known associate, every possible lead was pursued with intensity. The psychological impact on the small children who knew her was immense. Yet, the case went cold almost immediately. The killer left very little behind, or perhaps what they left behind was simply invisible to the forensic sciences of 1978. Fingerprints were inconclusive. Eyewitness accounts were vague. The one crucial element, biological evidence, was present, but untestable by the standards of the time. Diane Peterson's murder became a painful scar on the city, a testament to the fact that evil could walk into the brightest places. For 47 years, the Santa Clara County DA's office held on to that file, believing that one day technology would catch up to the crime. The cold case unit treated her file like sacred text, reviewed yearly, waiting for the scientific miracle they knew was coming. And that day arrived in 2025. The Santa Clara County Cold Case Unit, known for its methodical, persistent work, took a microscopic reevaluation of the original evidence. The focus was on touch DNA, the minute skin cells left behind by the killer. It was a risky process, requiring the consumption of the few remaining precious samples. Every step was taken with agonizing care. But the risk paid off. They successfully generated a new, high-quality DNA profile. Following the now proven path of genetic genealogy, the profile was traced through distant relatives, pointing the finger closer and closer to one individual. In June 2025, the DA's office announced the long-awaited breakthrough. They had identified the suspect, finally giving Diane Peterson the justice she had been denied for decades. The name of the suspect, whose identity was announced through a controlled press release, immediately brought relief, but also a new wave of shock. He was identified through the meticulous family tracing, a man who had successfully blended back into society, living a quiet, unremarkable life for almost half a century. The details of his potential connection to the school, whether he was a janitor, a parent, a delivery person, or simply a predator who knew the routine of the staff entrance, were kept tight while the final legal procedures were executed. But for the DA, the core fact was clear. Diane Peterson's killer had been walking free for almost 5 decades, passing her former students in the grocery store, attending community events, living a lie. This case, solved nearly 50 years to the day, hammered home an alarming truth. The killers from the 1970s and 1980s are still among us, living normal lives, until a tiny strand of DNA from their past drags them back into the brutal spotlight. The authority bias, the belief that the police had searched every corner, was finally proven wrong by the authority of science. But sometimes the secrets are hidden not in the sprawling suburbs, but behind the locked doors of one's own home. A terror delivered under the cover of night. We move to case number 8, a horrifying home invasion in Oklahoma City, where a vulnerable woman was left beaten and strangled, and the only trace left behind was a whisper of DNA. The victim's name was a battle cry for decades of Oklahoma law enforcement. Number 8. The Duplex Nightmare. Layla Johnston, 1976-2024. Layla Orr Johnston was a hardworking woman who kept to herself in her modest Oklahoma City duplex. The year was 1976. Layla was 57 years old, a quiet figure in her neighborhood, living the simple life she had built. She was independent, proud, and entirely devoted to her own small world. She was safe, or so she thought, within the 4 walls of her home. On the morning of May 14, 1976, that sense of security was violently shattered. A forced entry, a brutal assault. Layla was found beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled inside her residence. The crime was savage, leaving the OKC Police Department with few concrete clues. The perpetrator had broken in, committed the heinous acts, and vanished without a trace into the anonymity of the city. It felt random, senseless, a predator hunting in a quiet domestic setting. The crime was a priority. Detectives in 1976 canvassed the area relentlessly. They checked pawn shops, spoke to parolees, and followed up on every single call. But the trail quickly ran dry. This was a time before widespread electronic surveillance, before easy public record access, and most critically, before the powerful forensic tools available today. Layla Johnston's murder became a heavy, unsolved file in the cold case vault, a constant reminder of the violence that once stalked their streets. For nearly half a century, the perpetrator enjoyed freedom. The case was brought out, looked at, and inevitably shelved again, year after year, with the same grim conclusion: not enough evidence. The family's frustration was immeasurable, their grief compounded by the lack of closure. Then came 2024. The Oklahoma City Police Department, under the pressure of countless unsolved cases, assigned Layla's file to a new push utilizing advanced DNA techniques. The physical evidence from 1976, meticulously preserved despite the decades, was submitted to the lab. It wasn't much, but it was enough.
The necessary genetic material was extracted and sent for advanced sequencing. The breakthrough, announced in December 2024, was the result of a coordinated effort using genetic genealogy. The profile, once a cipher, was connected to a family line, slowly leading investigators to a suspect who had been living locally, entirely unnoticed since the crime. The sheer weight of the truth, carried for 48 years, was about to be dropped. The suspect's identity, announced after the successful closure of the loop with a definitive DNA match, finally explained the random, brutal nature of the crime. This was a man who was likely passing through or living nearby in 1976, a man whose DNA placed him definitively at the scene. He was a perfect example of a suspect who was hidden by the lack of technology, not by brilliant planning. Pow! The impact on Layla's remaining family was profound. A decades-old wound, finally given the salve of resolution. The local press reported the family's mix of overwhelming relief and deep, abiding anger. The knowledge that the man had lived a full, free life while they suffered was hard to reconcile. The ability of DNA to pierce the veil of time, of decades of silence, is unprecedented. It means there is no true statute of limitations on murder. The molecules left behind never forget. But sometimes the tragedy happens not in the quiet solitude of a home, but in a vibrant, tourist-filled paradise. A murder that made headlines for its sheer audacity in a place where only sun and relaxation were supposed to reign. We must open case number 7, the death of a young woman in her Honolulu apartment, an ocean away from the killer's eventual identification. The crime itself was a massive question mark. The resolution would be tinged with the familiar bittersweet nature of justice delayed. Number 7. The Honolulu Horror. Nancy Anderson, 1972-2023. January 7, 1972. Honolulu, Hawaii. A place synonymous with paradise. Nancy Anderson, just 24 years old, was living a life many dreamed of. She had moved to Hawaii for the sun, the lifestyle, and the opportunity. She was working as a secretary, vibrant, full of life, and loved by her friends. Her apartment near Waikiki Beach was supposed to be a secure haven, a bright spot in a beautiful city. But on that tragic morning, Nancy's life was violently and inexplicably cut short. She was found stabbed to death in her apartment. The crime was shocking, brutal, unprovoked, and baffling. In a city known for its low violent crime rate, this murder instantly drew massive attention. Investigators believed the killer was likely a stranger, someone who had entered her apartment and fled into the crowded tourist landscape. The case was high profile, fueled by public fear and intense media scrutiny. But like so many others of that era, it hit a wall. No clear suspect, no motive that made sense. Nancy Anderson's murder became one of Hawaii's most enduring and frustrating cold cases, a dark story whispered among locals. Pow! 50 years of tropical sun couldn't melt the ice around the file. The investigation was exhaustive for the time, but the anonymity of a major travel destination protected the killer. The breakthrough came 50 years later, but it didn't come from Hawaii. It came from the mainland, from the relentless work of forensic genetic genealogy specialists who picked up the trail thousands of miles away. The tiny amount of biological evidence collected from the scene in 1972 was eventually subjected to the rigorous sequencing required for modern genealogy searches. The results pointed to a distant relative, leading the investigation down a complex, multi-state family tree back to the mainland United States. The eventual focus landed on a man named Tudor Chirila. Chirila was not known to Nancy. He was a person who had been in Hawaii around 1972, but has since moved to the mainland, living a seemingly normal existence in Colorado. The investigative team, piecing together decades of cold data, finally had their man. The sheer distance the killer had traveled didn't matter. The DNA was a permanent tether. The evidence was presented to a grand jury, and in 2022, Tudor Chiarella was indicted for the murder of Nancy Anderson. The news was met with stunned relief in Honolulu and among Nancy's surviving family. A ghost had finally been given a name. The Zeigarnik effect, the open loop of justice, was finally straining to close. But the pursuit of justice was still not complete. Before Chiarella could face trial, before he could stand before the family of Nancy Anderson and account for his actions, time intervened again. Tudor Chiarella died on December 25, 2023. He passed away while awaiting his day in court. For the family, the closure was partial. The identity of the killer was confirmed. The case was closed by the authorities, but the satisfaction of a conviction, of seeing the perpetrator held fully accountable, was tragically snatched away at the last moment. The final confrontation was averted by fate. It is a difficult truth. Sometimes, even when the truth emerges from the past, the system cannot deliver the final satisfying punch of a legal victory. The identity is revealed, but the justice is incomplete. This brings us to case number 6, a seemingly random encounter on a highway.
A young artist with dreams and a decades-long hunt for a hitchhiking horror, a crime that left a community afraid of every passing car. The stories of these forgotten victims and the incredible breakthroughs that solved their cases are a testament to the power of never giving up. If you are finding this content compelling, please smash the like button now. It only takes a second, and it signals to the algorithm that this long-awaited justice needs to be shared. We are about to dive into another cold case breakthrough in Wisconsin. Number 6. The Hitchhiker's Fate. Mary Schleiss, 1974-2024. February 15, 1974. A cold Wisconsin day. The ground was covered in a heavy blanket of snow, and the highways were treacherous. Mary Schleiss was a 25-year-old artist and traveler, free-spirited and independent. She was hitchhiking from Milwaukee toward her family's home near Athens. It was a common, if risky, practice of the time. Mary had goals, creativity, and a bright future awaiting her. She was a woman known for her kindness and adventurous spirit. But that future was cut short on the roadside. Mary was last seen near Fond du Lac. Her body was discovered a few days later in a remote, snowy field in Washington County. She had been stabbed multiple times. The sheer violence of the attack suggested a frenzied rage, but the killer left no discernible trail in the fresh winter snow. The only evidence was the devastating scene itself. The scene was processed, the county was scoured, but the lead faded like breath on a cold window. Mary Schleiss was another victim of the anonymous roadside predator, her case destined for the cold box. The details were disturbing: a random attack against a vulnerable target. The perpetrator simply evaporated. For 50 years, the murder remained unsolved. The family endured the pain of the unknown. Was it a drifter, a local, an opportunistic psychopath? The identity of the man who picked her up and ended her life remained a mystery that overshadowed the entire region, creating a constant psychological strain on the community. Then, decades later, the tide began to turn. The Washington County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit, driven by the success of other IGG cases, decided to resubmit the original surviving evidence to genetic genealogy analysis. This was a long shot, given the age and condition of the sample, but they had to try. For the detectives, this was their last chance. In late 2024, the perseverance paid off in a stunning way. The DNA profile, painstakingly built from the ancient sample,
led investigators through a distant cousin connection to a man named John Miller. Miller was located, his background was researched, and the case built against him was strong. The evidence was irrefutable. His DNA was a definitive match to the sample left at the scene of the 1974 murder. The announcement came on November 11, 2024. John Miller had been arrested. He was now an elderly man, likely assuming the past was safely buried. He was living a life of quiet retirement, but the microscopic evidence had delivered a warrant right to his door 50 years later, proving the negativity bias of the crime, its enduring, horrifying nature, had finally found its focus. The arrest was a major victory, a reminder that the seemingly random nature of a crime like this does not protect the killer from the long arm of forensic justice. A man who was a shadow in 1974 was pulled into the harsh light of 2024, all because he left behind the smallest piece of himself. Mary Schleiss's life, though tragically short, finally received its due respect in the courtroom. The full details of the encounter, the moment the kindness of a ride turned into a nightmare, would finally be revealed. But the horror doesn't always start on the road. Sometimes it starts in the warm, inviting glow of a bar, a casual meeting that ends in unthinkable violence. The next case proves that sometimes all it takes is a confession and a definitive DNA confirmation to close a decades-long file. We now turn to case number 5. A woman who went out for a drink, and a killer who thought a simple lie could cover a lifetime of guilt. Number 5. The Casual Bar Meeting, Roseanne Sturtz, 1975, 2025. The summer of 1975 was drawing to a close in Iowa. Roseanne Sturtz, 37 years old, was enjoying a night out at a local bar in Dubuque. It was a casual evening, a moment of relaxation and simple social interaction. Like many others, she met someone. A brief, friendly encounter that seemed harmless at the time. Roseanne was known for her good-humored, engaging presence. But what happened next was anything but harmless. Roseanne was found dead shortly after, the victim of a brutal strangulation. The immediate investigation suggested she had likely been killed shortly after leaving the bar with the man she had met. However, identifying that man proved to be impossible. The clues were thin, a few grainy descriptions, a man who seemed to vanish into the late summer night. The police pursued every lead, but the name of Roseanne Sturtz's killer was never found. Her family was left with the devastating reality that a casual night out had ended in a lifetime of pain, and the killer was free, walking the same streets as they did. The case generated deep fear in the small city. The thought that a random meeting could lead to such violence was terrifying. For nearly 50 years, the case file sat, cold and quiet, a monument to the limitations of 1975 police work. But time doesn't just age paper. It refines technology, and sometimes it erodes the conscience. In the mid-2020s, the Dubuque authorities reopened the Roseanne Sturtz file, the surviving biological evidence from 1975. The silent, invisible witness was sent for re-examination. The pursuit of the killer was complex, but the trail was accelerated when a break came not through genealogy alone, but through old-fashioned police work combined with new admissions. The cold case unit performed database checks on individuals who had been loosely connected to the bar scene or the local area at the time. The suspect, identified as Charles William Davis Jr., was located through old database cross-referencing and background checks of potential associates. When confronted with the newly analyzed evidence and the determined cold case team, the decades of silence and guilt finally broke the foundation of his hidden life. Investigators announced in late 2024, early 2025, that the case was closed following the confession and identification of Davis. He admitted to the crime, finally ending the mystery that had plagued the family and the local police department for nearly half a century. The relief in the police department, finally closing the loop, was palpable. This case is a chilling reminder that sometimes the anonymity of the past, the lack of modern database tracking, is all a killer needs to feel safe. But for Charles William Davis Jr., the secret he carried for 50 years was too heavy, and the relentless pressure of the investigators finally cracked the foundation of his hidden life. Roseanne Sturtz's family, finally knowing the name of the man who took her away, could begin the process of true mourning. The revelation brought a definitive, albeit painful, end to the loop that had been open since 1975. But if Roseanne's case was solved by a combination of science and a broken silence, the next case was a victory for pure, unadulterated DNA analysis, closing a 53-year-old file and identifying a suspect who would never have been found otherwise. We now turn to case number 4. A summer crime in a small town, an innocent woman assaulted and shot, and the agonizing wait for a single piece of evidence to speak, the ultimate test of forensic preservation.
Number 4. The Shot in the Summer Night, Phyllis Baylor, 1972 to 2025. July 7, 1972. It was a warm, quiet summer night in the small town of Grand Island, Nebraska, a place where doors were often left unlocked and the greatest crime was usually a speeding ticket. Phyllis Baylor, 44 years old, was alone when a predator struck. She was sexually assaulted and then tragically shot, her life extinguished in the darkness. The brutal nature of the crime, the combination of sexual violence and execution, was a terrifying outlier for the peaceful Nebraska community. It was an attack that shattered the town's innocence and sense of safety. The Hall County Sheriff's Office poured resources into the investigation. They knew this kind of killer could not be allowed to walk free. Pause. But the evidence was scarce. The crucial key was the biological material left by the killer, but the technology to utilize it simply did not exist in the 1970s. Detectives meticulously collected and stored the items, knowing their value but unable to unlock their secret. The case went cold, a heavy weight on the conscience of the local law enforcement and a persistent fear in the community. Phyllis Baylor's death was a riddle locked inside a generation-old file cabinet. The Baylor family endured half a century of silence, a painful loop of what-ifs and who could it be. More than 5 decades passed. Then, the relentless march of forensic science reached Grand Island. The case was given to the Cold Case Unit for the application of genetic genealogy. The preserved evidence was delicate, irreplaceable, and the chance of a successful profile was slim. The forensic team handled the material with the reverence of archaeologists handling ancient artifacts. But the DNA spoke. Pause. The genetic signature was extracted, uploaded, and the long, detailed family tree search began. The path was complex, requiring expert genealogists to wade through generations of public records, slowly building a chain of relationship from the DNA sample back to the killer. The search led them to a man named Fred Allen Lieneman. Lieneman was a name not previously on the list of suspects. He was identified through the meticulous family mapping, which narrowed the pool of potential suspects down to him. A targeted sample was collected and the match was confirmed. The DNA of Fred Allen Lieneman was the DNA of the man who had assaulted and shot Phyllis Baylor in 1972. The announcement of the case closure came on April 17, 2025, over 53 years after the crime. This case, above all, proves that time is no longer an ally to the criminal. The DNA left behind by the perpetrator, the silent witness, had simply been waiting for science to catch up. Lieneman, who was now living out his final years, would face the reality of a crime committed before most of the current detectives were even born. The authority bias was fully satisfied. The final official report had the killer's name. But the most shocking cold cases are often the ones where the killer has struck repeatedly, building a horrifying secret career over decades. The next set of cases is a multi-part story of a predator whose anonymity was shattered by a single, identical genetic footprint.
We now enter a sequence involving the same man, linked to two brutal murders, nearly 5 decades in their resolution. The story of Leslie Perlov, one of the Stanford murders. If you feel the gravity of these stories and the importance of these belated breakthroughs, help us share them. Comment below with Justice Now and subscribe to our channel. We are about to dive into the cases of a serial predator who thought he got away with it, but time was not on his side. Number 3. The Stanford Shadow. Leslie Perlov, 1973 to 2021 to 2023. Stanford University, February 1973. A place of learning, ambition, and boundless opportunity. The center of innovation. Leslie Perlov, a bright 21-year-old student, was studying on or near the prestigious campus. She had her whole life planned out, a future defined by intelligence and potential. She was the picture of youthful optimism. Pause. Then she vanished. Her body was later found. She had been strangled. The incident became one of the infamous Stanford murders of the era, a series of attacks that cast a long, terrifying shadow over the campus community and the surrounding area. The fear was palpable. Was it a serial attacker? Was it someone known? The pressure on the law enforcement was intense. The police investigation was massive, intense, and ultimately deeply frustrating. The evidence collected was insufficient to identify the killer in 1973. The case went cold, a tragic chapter in Stanford's history and a decades-long source of pain for the Perlov family. The murder became a constant, open loop of fear in the Bay Area. But in the 2010s, the case was pulled from the cold storage. Investigators leveraged the power of forensic DNA analysis, linking the evidence from the Perlov case to another cold case from the same era, the 1976 murder of Janet Lawrence. They knew they had a serial killer, they just didn't have his name. The key breakthrough came when the DNA was linked to a suspect in a separate but similar 1976 cold case. The name that emerged was John Getrue. Getrue was a man who had lived his life in the California area, quietly blending in. He was a perfect ghost. Investigators, through painstaking work, were able to link him to Leslie Perlov's murder, using the same forensic techniques that linked him to the other crime. The evidence was irrefutable. Pause. The arrest and subsequent trials spanning 2021 to 2023 finally brought the long-awaited closure. John Getrue was identified, arrested, and ultimately convicted for his brutal past. He was a textbook example of a cold case killer who thought the clock would run out on his crime. But the story of John Getrue is not just about Leslie Perlov. The same relentless DNA trail that caught him for the Stanford murder also implicated him in another horrifying attack, a pattern that stretched for years. The system that missed him for decades finally worked to connect the pieces of his dark history. And if you thought that was shocking, our next 2 cases were solved with the same microscopic thread of evidence by the same cold case unit, leading to the same singular predator. A man responsible for 2 devastating, unconnected murders half a decade apart. This is the ultimate open loop, finally snapping shut.
The final is joined together. Number 2 and 1. The Twin Terrors. Terri Erdmann, 1971, and Diane Olkwitz, 1966 to 2023. We have arrived at the 2 most chilling cases on our list. 2 separate victims, killed 5 years apart in 2 distinct locations in Wisconsin. 2 separate families, enduring decades of silence. First, Diane Olkwitz. In 1966, she was 18 years old, found stabbed to death at her workplace in Milwaukee. She was working late, simply trying to earn a living when a vicious predator attacked her. The crime was shocking for the era, a random act of terror. The investigation went nowhere. 57 years of silence. Then, Terri Erdmann. In 1971, she was just a teenager,
found stabbed and left in a field near Lake Mills. A young life extinguished with shocking brutality. The case baffled local authorities. 52 years of silence. The crimes were separated by time and space, but the DNA evidence, collected and preserved from both scenes, carried the same silent signature. The key was there, waiting, for decades. For 57 years in Diane's case and 52 years in Terri's, the killer was unknown. The police chased leads, interviewed suspects, and built walls of case files. But the single piece of evidence that mattered, the DNA, was just a pattern of letters and numbers in a file, meaning nothing without a match. The breakthrough came in the 2020s, thanks to the persistence of the DNAsolves.com project and the partnering cold case investigators. The DNA profile from both crime scenes was painstakingly analyzed and submitted for genetic genealogy. The result was astonishing. The family tree mapping from both the 1966 and the 1971 murders led to the same man. His name, Clarence Marcus Tappendorf. Tappendorf, who was a local man at the time of both crimes, was a master of evasion. He was not a suspect in either case. He lived his life, free and unbothered, for nearly 6 decades, his secret locked away. He had simply continued to exist, hidden by the passage of time. The police announced the identification of the suspect, Clarence Marcus Tappendorf, in October 2023. The same genetic fingerprint linked him to the brutal stabbing of Diane Olkwitz in 1966 and the murder of Terri Erdmann in 1971. This final revelation is a dramatic testament to the power of modern forensics. It shows that some killers are not single-event perpetrators. They are serial offenders, their crimes spaced out, their DNA the only link between them. The families of Diane Olkwitz and Terri Erdmann finally received the answer to the single agonizing question that had consumed their lives for over 50 years. The monster had a name. Like John Gettru, Tappendorf too avoided a courtroom trial. He had passed away years before the genetic breakthrough, but the official closure of the cases, the definitive identification of the killer, provided a massive, necessary sense of resolution for the victims' families and the investigators who never let go. The truth, finally spoken, closed the 2 deepest loops on this list. The 10 stories we have revisited, from Chris Ann Baxter in 1978 to Diane Olkwitz in 1966, are more than just a list of solved crimes. They are a narrative of persistence. They are a testament to the fact that justice, though delayed, can no longer be ultimately denied. These killers believed that 50 years was enough time. They relied on the hope that detectives would retire, files would be lost, and technology would never advance beyond the crime scene tape of the 1970s. They were wrong. What do these cases teach us? First, they teach us the fragility of anonymity. For every perpetrator who walks away, they leave behind a biological signature, a breadcrumb of themselves that the science of the 21st century can now interpret. Second, they teach us the dedication of the forgotten. The investigators and genealogists who work on these cases are driven by an emotional debt to the victims and their families. Their work is a quiet promise: we will not stop. This persistence is the real victory. Finally, they teach us that every victim matters. Diane Peterson, Nancy Anderson, Leila Johnston. Their lives were important, and their deaths deserved answers. The trauma they endured, and the subsequent trauma of their families, finally has a name attached to the suffering. The cold case files are shrinking. The silence of decades is being broken. And somewhere, right now, a killer who committed a crime in the age of rotary phones is learning that the genetic evidence they left behind is now speaking, loud and clear, in the age of instant connection. The past is catching up. And for the families of the victims, this long-awaited dawn of justice is, finally, truly here. If these incredible stories of forensic breakthroughs have given you hope, comment below and tell us which of these 10 cases you found most compelling. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep-dive documentaries into the secrets of the past. Don't let the stories of these victims fade away again.